everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I think most of you that are watching right now do know me, but if you don't, my name is Daisy Farrell. I'm a psychic medium and healer, and I'm here today because I'm really excited. This is such a fun topic to discuss. It's something that's just been coming up a lot lately, so I wanted to do a whole event where I just really dove into this kind of more deeply and discuss this with people. Because I think there's just so many conflicting things out there, and it's just really good to get just some more clarity on that. And so most of the people here, I'm sure, have probably experienced some of the stuff that I'm going to discuss today and are maybe curious or interested or feel drawn to mediumship, but they're just not really sure where to go or where to get started. So I'm going to kind of discuss all that stuff today. So I'm super excited. Now, I'm just going to light a little sage for us, because why not? And just continue to say hi as you're coming on here, so I know that everything's working. Mercury's still in retrograde, so I just want to make sure that nothing happens. Wow, that's crazy. Well, I'm glad you're here, for sure. Let's see here. So, oh yeah, also, you guys, so if you have any questions related to mediumship at all, or like maybe as I'm speaking, there's something that comes up, feel free to just ask a question in the comments, okay? And I'll do my best to get to all of them. If I don't have time, I can certainly answer them in another live as well, okay? So just lighten some sage, clear some energy for us. All right, you guys, let's dive in. Ooh, look at this awesome citrine I just got. How amazing is that? I'm obsessed with it. Other thing I'm doing tonight at 7, I'm doing a flash sale of all my crystal inventory on Instagram Live. I'll put a link in the comments later to my Instagram, because I'm going to be selling all of my crystal inventory for up to like 50% off. So definitely check that out if you want some crystals. And all right, let's dive in. Okay, so mediumship. So here's the thing. I'm just going to start by discussing a few basics before I kind of dive into the signs of mediumship and that you may be a medium, because I think it's important to clarify a few things. One of the main things I wanted to talk about is that I personally, so again, there's a lot of different opinions out there when it comes to mediumship, right? And my opinion, not everybody's going to agree with that, and that's totally fine. It's not the most popular opinion from what I've seen, but I personally don't believe that every single person can be a natural-born medium. I think natural-born mediums are personally very rare. But I want to also clarify this, what I'm saying. The other thing is that I believe that every person in the world, no matter who they are, can absolutely 100% always connect to the other side and have a connection and a relationship to the other side. There's a big difference there, okay? Every single person can work on developing that connection, can have a communication, a back and forth with their loved ones in spirit, and they don't need a medium to necessarily have that connection by any means. And often I always encourage clients of mine to work on establishing that, because they're your loved ones ultimately, right? So you're going to have the strongest connection to them. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying that you can't have a connection. You absolutely can. But when it comes to being a true natural-born medium, I believe that that's pretty rare. Now, there's a few other things that I think are worth discussing and kind of breaking down here when it comes to mediumship as well. I personally feel that there are kind of 3 types of communication or ways certain mediumistic things can come through in readings. And I just want to make sure, I wrote a bunch of notes, you guys, so I can make sure that I'm getting everything here. Oh, right, before I dive into that, there's another thing. I think there's 2 ways people come into mediumship as well. Either number 1, from childhood. So meaning that you literally, from the time you were born, like as soon as you can remember, right? You remember having experiences, being able to speak to people on the other side, seeing ghosts or whatever as a child. That's pretty common. That can be pretty common for people that end up being mediums in life. But it's not true for everyone, me being one of them. So it depends. So that's the second way. And this to me is latent mediumship. Now, when it comes to the latent piece, that's going to be when somebody, let's say, did not necessarily have those like really, really clear things happen to them as a child for them to know without a shadow of a doubt that they were a medium. They may have had other experiences, and I'm going to get into that. But they're just not aware, right? They're not aware. It's not in the foreground of their life. And then almost always, I want to say basically almost like 99% of the time, right? A major life event occurs that triggers the onset of opening up to mediumship. So it's probably has always been there, right? But for whatever reason, we just weren't ready maybe to take on that responsibility, that challenge at that time or that earlier in life, right? So typically a major life event, so this could be losing someone, a passing of a loved one, is very often a trigger for something like this. But it doesn't have to always be. It can also be some form of traumatic event, even some sort of like major illness, let's say, something where you're bedridden for a really long time. Lots of different things like that, right, is very commonly something that I'll see when it comes to the onset of latent mediumship. And that was true for me. So for me, I had like all of these signs, but I just wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of what they actually meant or like their deeper meaning. And for me, I had a lot of different like traumatic events and things take place right before all of this began for me. So it was very, very true for me. So now the second thing that I was going to touch on is basically how communication can take place. Sorry guys, there's someone knocking at my door. Hang on. I don't know who that is. But hopefully they leave. Sorry guys. Also, let me know if this is still working because I just want to make sure. Let me check the comments on my phone too. Okay, so the next thing is ways that communication can take place. So this is another thing that I think is really important to touch on. And I think, first of all, one thing here is that I think a lot of psychics will sometimes feel that they are mediums, and they absolutely could be having mediumistic connection, but it's not true mediumship. I'm sorry, guys. Let me see. Yeah, right? I do too. They keep knocking. I don't know what to do. Okay. Sorry, guys. Hang on. I don't know who that is. I feel like they can like hear me talking, and they probably think that I'm not gonna answer because I'm not. All right. Probably some ghosts. Most likely, right? Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and hopefully they don't get mad at me. So very often, right, a psychic could be doing a reading for someone, and this is the thing. They can very easily, if they're a great psychic especially, right, they can totally connect with their sitter's aura and pick up on the fact that they may have lost someone recently, right? They could pick up on the fact that they've lost their mom. And they may even also be able to pick up what that relationship was like and maybe the more details about that relationship. They could even pick up on things about what that person was like. And that can very often, you know, it could feel like true mediumship a lot of the times. And that's very common. I think sometimes psychics don't have, you know, the tools or necessarily just the education to know the difference. But that's something that often happens, right? And they're not aware of what actually is taking place there. That's not true mediumship, right? That's actually a psychic reading. That's a psychic reading. So I think it's important to establish that. Another thing that you'll hear pretty often, right, is that all mediums are psychics, but not all psychics are mediums. And I think that's very true. The second form of communication that I find is that, and this is just the way that I view it, right? Everyone's going to have a different opinion here, But another thing, so this could be, again, is always going to be a psychic, right, taking place here with this. But this is more a secondary form of communication. So let's say that the person in spirit is kind of to their side, is the way I kind of view it, right? And they're kind of relaying some information here and there psychically to you. But to me, it's not full on mediumship communication. Now, that form to me, not always, but is often seen maybe in people that have to do a lot of mediumship training and development. And again, don't get me wrong, I think that that's required for anyone. But just to get an idea of how this is different is that I find that it takes much more effort to get to a level of evidence and feedback and whatever information from the spirit person. It just takes more effort for the person when it's this secondary form of communication. And but the thing is that if somebody is really dedicated and they really, really work at it and they practice like crazy, sometimes they can get to a really pretty decent level there in that way. So, and I've seen it before. I mean, that can totally be a thing. It's just going to be much more, it's going to require a lot more effort on their part. And this can also happen, I think this also happens sometimes with people that maybe do like Akashic Records readings. Like I know like my friend Laura, like she'll have something like that take place, right? But she doesn't believe, she's like, I don't believe that I'm a medium, but I have stuff like that happen where someone, a loved one in spirit, will come through and kind of bring a message, but it won't be much more than that, right? It'll be pretty brief, which is often also another kind of sign here. And then that leads us to what I believe is primary communication and what is really true natural mediumship. So for me, that's when the spirit, loved one in spirit, is merging completely with the medium. And with this, it's often effortless, very natural. It's just how they're built, right? So it's just a very effortless merging with this spirit. And you'll get very detailed, deep information with not a lot of effort. Usually it should be pretty easy for the person. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I believe that you should always train and do a lot of time in development before ever doing it professionally. But that's, to me, the three kind of main ways that communication can sometimes take place, okay? Any questions, you guys, so far? Oh, thanks, Sherry. I think they left. So hopefully it wasn't like my neighbor or something and they're mad at me. Hope not, but it's okay. Any questions, you guys? If not, I'll keep going here. No? Okay. All right, so this leads then into the main thing here, which is the signs. So signs of being a medium, okay? There's quite a few. And one thing I also want to point out is that there is quite a few overlap. There is a lot of overlap here sometimes with some of these. And I'll touch on that more in a minute, okay? But one of the first signs that I'll talk about here is having paranormal experiences in your life. So it doesn't have to be like when you were a kid. It certainly could be, but it could be at any point in your life. Experiencing something paranormal, whether this is seeing someone, hearing something, seeing something move by itself, electronics doing crazy things, a lot of different things. I mean, there's a huge spectrum here as far as paranormal experiences go, but that's a very common one. And often we don't put two and two together, right? I mean, for me, I didn't. So I had a lot of paranormal experiences growing up, and especially as a young adult. But I never thought, oh, that's because they know that I can hear them or whatever, right? I didn't put that together because at the time I just wasn't aware of that. But I had a lot of different experiences where I saw things, heard things, all kinds of things. And so I mean, that's very common. That's very, very common. The next one is just that you've always naturally have been drawn to spiritual stuff. So the occult, like not in a bad, scary way, but just anything like occult, like witchcraft, ghosts, the paranormal, psychics, mediums, just that you've always been interested in it. You've always been drawn to it. So that's also very true for me. I remember being, I believe I was like 9, and I became obsessed with ghost hunting. And I remember I like obsessively followed this website. I don't even remember what it's called anymore. I don't even know if it exists anymore. But it was basically this kind of ongoing blog of different photos and videos, and even I think just written paranormal experiences that people had. And I would obsessively look through it every day, all the time. It was like all I cared about. And I remember I even got like an EMF detector, which if you don't know that, that's like an electromagnetic field detector. A lot of ghost hunters, paranormal investigators will use those. And I got one at like 10. And I remember I like made this whole thing like where I was a ghost hunter, and I had this whole book where I wrote all my missions of different paranormal like investigations I was doing. And for me, it was all just a game, but that's the thing. I mean, looking back now, I can understand a deeper level of that, of just that there was a connection there that I just didn't know, but it was just so natural for me. I was so naturally drawn to that. Okay. So then the other one here is, and then so some of these here, right? These can have some overlap. There's definitely some overlap when it comes to being a psychic, being an empath, being a medium. There's definitely some overlap there in some of these experiences, okay? This one in particular, so just knowing things. Having an experience where you just know things. And this is actually a pretty common one for most people. I think almost anyone can look back and think of a time, right, when they just had a feeling that something was going to happen and then it did. Or they had a bad feeling about something and they were right. That is often just like human intuition, right? But to take it a step further and more focus on mediumship here, to me, this would be just knowing things about someone that passed. So for example, you go into work and you see your coworker and they don't seem any kind of particular way, but for some reason you feel that they've just lost someone. Now again, that also could be a little bit of empath stuff going on, but let's say you just get the thought or the idea like, I feel like they lost their mom or something like that. That can certainly be an indicator. I know some people have had experiences too where they'll go up to someone and they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry that this person passed. And the other person will be like, well, how do you know that, right? So that can definitely be a sign when you're kind of getting information about people that passed away. So this could also, another example of this could be that you just feel like you know certain things about maybe a person's dad, and there's no way for you to know that. But you're not necessarily like aware of what you're actually doing or the information or where it's coming from, right? Or for example too, like if you maybe intuitively pick a certain type of flower for someone when a loved one of theirs has passed, and you give it to them and they're like, oh my God, that was this person's favorite flower or whatever, right? So little things like that, little knowings associated with a person that passed away, especially, okay? Another one here is having premonitions. That's a big one that I think people don't often know about. Premonitions, and also, this doesn't have to be in dreams, can also be in your waking life as well, but it could also be, so another piece to that, this is kind of a two-part one, is also just having really vivid dreams, and always having really vivid dreams is often a big sign of psychic ability as well, just really strong intuitive ability. So for me, ever since I can remember, I've always had extremely vivid, detailed dreams, and I still do to this day. But for a long time, I was like, well, that's just how I am. It's not anything psychic, right? I didn't know at the time. But another one here is premonition dreams, especially premonition dreams of maybe people passing. Now, I know when it comes to this, sometimes people can be fearful of that stuff, and I totally get that. For me, I had several premonition dreams. The first one I had was, I believe I was 11, of someone passing, but they didn't pass for many years later. So sometimes it can happen right away, sometimes many years later. And I also don't want to like freak anyone out. Like sometimes when we have dreams of things happening, it doesn't mean it's always going to happen or come true, right? But if this has happened to you, it can certainly be an indicator of psychic ability and something else going on here. Another thing, so going into that more, is visitation dreams. But going a step further here. So visitation dreams from a loved one in spirit, anybody can experience that, and they're awesome. That's a wonderful way to be able to connect with someone and just feel their presence, right? So anyone can have access to that. That's anybody. However, I think the distinguishing difference here for somebody that's a medium is that you'll start getting visitation dreams from people that have passed that aren't necessarily a direct relationship with you. So for example, this is what happened to me when this all began for me. I had a bunch of craziness going on in my life, and then a bunch of people closer to me, but also secondary people, had passed away, and I started getting visitation dreams from them. So it was people that weren't directly connected to me. It was a secondary thing. And the other distinguishing factor here was that the messages, I was getting messages from them. And it was also very clear that they were messages for other people, so not for me. So that's a big distinguishing factor here, right? So for example, like my fiance, his friend had passed. And the first visitation dream that was different that had taken place here for me. Because before all of this, I didn't really have a lot of visitation dreams, to be honest. I had premonitions, but I didn't have like visitation dreams like this. Oh, I'm so sorry, Marie, to hear that. I'm sending you lots of love. I know how hard that can be. Rob, you mentioned intuition. How can someone tell the difference between intuition, premonition, vision? Yes, I will answer that in just a minute, Rob. So basically what happened here was, so my fiance's friend had passed, and I had a dream that I was my fiance. So, right, so weird. I mean, not weird for me. I'm all kinds of weird things in my dreams. So not that weird, to be honest. And I was literally on Facebook in the dream, and I was messaging with his friend on Facebook Messenger. And looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, well, they were trying to make it really clear to me, like really obvious, right? Like this is a message for Brian, right? For not for you. This is for someone else, because I was talking as my fiance to this friend back and forth. And then later on, I told my fiance about this, and the way I was talking, the way that this friend had been speaking was very much how he would have spoken when he was alive. And I wouldn't have known that. Another example was another friend of mine had passed, and I was connected to their daughter. And they came through and were giving a message to me that was, again, very obviously not for me. So that's another distinguishing factor here to keep in mind. That can be very common for people that are mediums. So Rob was just asking about intuition and to know the difference between some of these things. So some of this can get kind of tricky to distinguish at times. A premonition is literally just when you have a vision of something. So this can be when you're awake, which has happened to me as well. So if you're, let's say, very clairvoyant, or you don't have to be just clairvoyant. You could also just be ruminating on a thought. You could be thinking something really weird, right? Or you could just notice that a thought pops into your head. Let's say about maybe a car accident or something. And then you notice a car accident happen right in front of you or something, right? Again, or this could be in a dream. So for me, I had dreams where I saw that a person that I was close with had passed, and then it did take place soon after. And if it didn't happen soon after, there were clues in the dream that gave me detail as to how the person was going to pass. And then it comes true. So that's what a premonition is. A vision, I mean, can be very broad in its term. Visions, I mean, really, I just kind of look at that as clairvoyance. So that's really seeing things from your third eye, which is more internal vision. So just like if you close your eyes and you think of just a happy memory, right? You bring yourself to a place like that. That's clairvoyance. Now, some people do also see things externally. That's more rare, but it does happen. I see things quite a bit externally, but not like a lot. It's not like the Sixth Sense. Some people, I guess, do have that, but that's pretty rare. I find it more productive to see things more internally because it's less jarring, right? And then dreams, I mean, vivid dreams, again, like I said, can just be a sign of strong intuition. And intuition is really just the innate kind of psychic ability that we are all born with. Everybody has a little bit of intuition. Everyone. And everyone can also strengthen it and develop it further. One example that I like to always give when it comes to this, especially for just overall just psychic ability and intuition, these things can be used pretty interchangeably, and they often are, especially nowadays. But often, and I just forgot what I was thinking. What was I talking about? Intuition, something like that. Well, I forgot. Oh, I remembered. There we go, you guys. Okay. Fibrofog is giving me a hard time today. So, right. Okay. So just like with artwork or playing an instrument, right? Anybody can do that if they want to. Anybody can paint. They can play the guitar if they feel like it. Not everybody is going to be a celebrity, guitar player, right? And I think that's a great way to look at how intuitive abilities work. Everybody can work with it. Everybody can utilize it to some degree, and it can bring them a lot of positive benefits, right? But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily like have to be a professional psychic. Does that make sense? And Levita, I was dreaming my mom was in a wreck, and when the impact happened, I woke up frantic. She was in an accident, not where I saw the wreck, but she was actually in the wreck, though. Yeah. So that's it. I hope she's okay. But that is exactly what I'm talking about. Yep, that's a perfect example of a premonition dream. So thank you for sharing that. So, okay. So the next thing here. So visitation dreams. Yeah. Had that happen this year, my cousin's friend partner died. I'm sorry to hear that. They wondered if he could hear them while he was comatose, so the partner came to me in a dream and let me know that he did hear them. I told my cousin, and he showed me a pic of the deceased. And yep, it was him. I never met him or knew him. I told him this message to get. That's amazing, Sherry. So yeah, that's a great example. Amazing example. So that's exactly what I'm talking about, okay? So yeah, big one. So you should probably do my course. I'm going to talk about that at the end of this. Okay. So here's another thing. I'm just checking my notes here from everything I downloaded. Yeah. So another sign, and again, this one in particular can especially be an overlap with empathic, psychic, medium, and so forth, right? But let's say in your lifetime, you've just had an experience many, many times, or like let's say this happens to you all the time, right? Where random people, strangers that you barely know, come up to you and they just unload themselves on you. Like they unload their personal life, their personal details, whatever's going on with them for no apparent reason, right? That's very common, especially if you're an empath too. Something that's happened to me my whole life. That's always been a thing for me. People have always come to me for advice, come to me to just kind of share really personal things. One thing that I think is really interesting too is often if you're a natural medium, sometimes, and we're not always aware of this, right? But sometimes we can actually kind of embody the energy or the feeling of a loved one in spirit of another person. And it can make them feel really comfortable or comforted without us realizing that that's what we're doing. And that's totally been a thing that's happened to me many times. And now, obviously, I'm aware of it when it's happening, too. But in the past, I wasn't necessarily as aware, right? But that's absolutely a thing as well. And then another one is channeling advice to other people. And what I mean by channeling is just that, let's say you've had an experience, or maybe several, right, where people will come to you for advice, and you give them advice, but it doesn't really feel like you, okay? And it's a little hard to explain, right? It can be kind of subtle too. But you just feel like, whoa, like, where did that come from, right? I don't really know where that advice came from, especially if it's something that maybe you haven't personally experienced that you can really give like your feedback on, but you just happen to know exactly what to say. That's also very common, a form of mediumship. Not always, but it absolutely can be a form of mediumship. So then, let me see here. Another thing, okay, yeah. So another thing is just being very sensitive to energy and always being aware of it. Now, one thing that also is so common that I find is it's a lot of people that are naturally born mediums have a history of depression, anxiety, mental illness, also even addiction, very common, like me. So that's very common because often for people that don't know what they are, they'll have a lot of stress and anxiety because they're feeling a lot of different feelings from a lot of different sources, right? And they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what it is. So they just think it's them. So that was very true for me. I was somebody that absorbed everything from every different person. And then I was also absorbing stuff from people on the other side, but I didn't even know that. And I was a full-blown addict, because of this. I mean, it's not just because of that. I want to make that clear, right? There's a lot of other factors there. But that's totally a common thing for people to have really high anxiety and issues with just absorbing other people's stuff, feeling overwhelmed, having panic attacks even, right? Also very common is like having issues in crowded places. So when I first started opening up, I could not handle going to overly crowded places. It was really overwhelming for me, and I would freak out. Now that's not a problem. Now I'm able to control that. That just takes time. But that's also very common that maybe you don't know, or like you're not sure why you feel that way when you're in crowds, right? But that could totally be a reason. Share. I would start channeling when I went to the records. Yeah, totally. So for me, that's divine channeling from another source. Absolutely. Another sign here is getting signs and synchronosities. So also very, very common when you're being called to this work or being called to spiritual work in general. So for example, one thing that happened to me a lot, so I was getting all these visitation dreams, right? And at the same time, I was pulling cards pretty regularly. That was like the first thing that I had ever really played with any kind of energy work or psychic stuff. And every day, I would pull this card that said mediumship on it. No matter what I did, it was like I always pulled it. So that can be very common, like you get a sign like that. So it could either be something like that, or it can be a sign that you're getting different signs from people's loved ones too. And I know I've had other videos on here about this. Signs and symbols can be very complex and vary person to person, right? Some of the more common ones can be birds, animals, music, just little things like people's names or people that you meet during the day that have the same name as someone that maybe passed away, right? Different little things. It can be a lot of different things. But the more open you are to it, the more often you'll notice, the more you'll see. And it can also really help you kind of follow that path and follow that intuition and help guide you more as well. So that's also very common. Another thing that was happening to me too was that, so I was getting this high anxiety that was like getting worse and worse and worse. I was sober at this point, but it was just like I couldn't stand going to work. I couldn't stand being in public places. I didn't know what was really going on. I was getting these visitation dreams. I kept pulling this mediumship card, And then I also started having a lot of paranormal things actually happen in my home all the time. It was like happening all the time. It was a lot. So hearing things, seeing things, things were disappearing in my home. A lot of electronics were freaking out for no good reason. At 4 a.m. I was hearing so much chatter, and it was kind of overwhelming. The chatter hadn't come in a long time. I said, oh no, it's back. But then I remembered I can clear this up. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I've definitely talked about in other lives, is that, we're in control. I think there's so much fear of the unknown. There's so much fear even of mediumship for some people too. But what they don't realize is just that we have complete control over it. We're not at the mercy of spirit. We have the control, and nothing can hurt us. It's all really just up to us. So definitely a good point. So I think that's, let me see. Yeah. So I think those are all the main ones that I had really brought through to share today. So now I'm going to go into the second part here, which is, okay, so now what, right? So let's say that a lot of these things are true for you. And you're kind of like, okay, so what do I do about it, Daisy? Right? So this is what I would say. It's a few things. So when it comes to mediumship, and I forget who said this. One really famous medium I know has said this many times, where they talk about that many are called and few will answer. I think that's very true. Because here's the thing. Some people could be natural born mediums, right? And they could be kind of developing a little bit or open to it, but then it's not for them. Because that's, I think, one of the biggest things to bring up here, is that mediumship is not for everyone. And that's okay. That's totally okay. And there's two things here that actually come up for me. So it's actually three things, right? So here's the thing. You can make a choice. And sometimes you need to explore a little before you really make that choice. That's the other thing. But really, it's making the choice of, okay, I'm accepting this calling 100%, and I'm going to dive in and commit to it. Or it can be that I want to explore this further and see maybe how I can just integrate it into my life as it is now and not pursue it professionally. Some water. So what I mean by that is basically people can use mediumship and be of service to people without being a professional medium. And what I mean by that is that you could, for example, just provide comfort or use your intuition or use your psychic abilities in the work that you already do to just enhance it. And it's kind of this indirect way of helping people. And I think it's awesome when people do that. Because it's all about really feeling into, who am I? What does my soul really desire? And feel that it's its true calling. And really trust that. Because I think one thing that's really important to talk about is that I think sometimes people reach for mediumship as a way to almost fill a hole, or to make them feel like they have a calling, and they'll kind of try to force it. And that's not something that you want to do. I totally get, it's very alluring, right? I get the idea and the concept behind that, and I think often people will do that. But it's not something you want to do that with, right? And there's a lot of reasons that I will bring up for that. And then the other thing is just to say, I don't think it's for me. And trusting that. Because that's what I mean. One of the things I mean by what I just said before is that it's not for everyone. And if it's not for you, don't force it. Because forcing it is way more harmful than any good it could offer. And there's a lot of reasons behind that I'll share. So again, let me just see here. So two things first that I think, so let's say after everything that I just said, you're like, yes, I want to just explore this more before I make that choice or make that decision or just understand maybe where this is taking me. The best thing you can do is take a beginner's class, a beginner's mediumship class, just to have somebody that's experienced guide you into connecting for the first time, or seeing if that's even there, right? So really exploring that at a deeper level. I think that's really important. Even before, like, I mean, I would never say, like, get a mentor or anything. Do that first. Just do a beginner's class first, just to explore what happens. For some people, you know, this will help really clarify for them, this is where I'm going, this is what I want to do, and oh, there really is something here. Because, for example, for me, I didn't really believe that I could connect when I was awake. I was like, well, you know, I have these messages coming through in dreams, but I don't really think I can connect when I'm awake. I mean, that's never happened to me, right? So I took the first thing I actually did was I went to a very credible medium to just get some clarity. They confirmed that I was a medium, but I still was like, I don't know. And so then I reached out to another medium, and I took a beginner's class with her, and that was really crucial in just my development. That was really so important. I don't think I'd be here if I didn't do that, right? She was the one that helped me, that led me into connecting for the first time. And for me, because for me, I feel, you know, I'm a natural medium. So for me, once I had someone lead me into that connection, it just clicked for me. Like, I understood it. It made sense. And it was pretty, like, I got it pretty quickly. Now, and that's not, I don't want people to get discouraged if, like, that doesn't happen that quickly for you. But that's why taking a class like that can be so helpful, because it just guides you into opening that up. And so that was really all I needed. I got that to start me off and to be like, wow, this really is real. And I still didn't really believe it for quite a long time. I was pretty stubborn about it, right? Because I'm someone that's very much like, give me proof. You know, I want to see it. And you can't really see it with this stuff. You can get evidence, and that's great. But it's still the unseen, right? So a lot of that is also trust. So from there, what I would say is you start with that. Then from there, I think it's super important to get a really, really fabulous mentor that you work one-on-one with. And always make sure that it's a really credible person, someone that has a ton of experience. And make sure that you also view, if possible, that you view them in action too. That you really appreciate and respect their way of doing mediumship, right? That's really important. You want to make sure that that connection is really, really good, and that you really feel similar to the person, or you just feel that you really, you like the way they work and you like their values. Because unfortunately, that's the other thing when it comes to mediumship, is just that there's no college. I mean, there are schools, right? But there's no like requirement for you to have a degree or a bachelor's in mediumship to offer it to people. And that's unfortunately where it can get really scary and dangerous, because there's a lot of people out there that maybe they may have ability, right? But they don't have the right morals. They don't have the right things they just don't have the right training, right? So they can be quite harmful to the people that they're giving readings to. So that's where it can get scary. But that's why I also just really, really say, like, if you really truly want to do this as a professional job, you have to realize that it's not like easy done, got it. Like, I'm going to do one thing and I got it. And that's the other thing that's scary, is like, I'll see a lot of times that there's like courses out there, right, for mediumship that will certify people after like a weekend of classes, which just scares me. That just scares me. Like, I think you need a minimum of 2 years of really intensive training. And this is not just from a one-on-one mentor. This would also be development circles are so crucial in any form of mediumship development. So what development circles are is people that are all looking to develop mediumship, all coming together. There's actually a lot on Zoom, but they're also in person. And you go, usually for a lot of people, this becomes kind of a ritual, and they'll go weekly. And you all practice, you all go around and you all practice bringing through messages. So that's a very, very valuable tool, because often there will also be like a head kind of medium that will be running that circle and will give you feedback and will just help you along. And that's just really helpful because it's usually free, and it's a great way to just dip your toe in, to just get more exposure, get more practice, and also to connect with other people on that path. Then I'd also recommend taking several classes. But again, I think it's also really important to point out that there is such thing as taking too many classes. And that may be like, kind of like, really? I mean, because, and the reason I'm saying this is because sometimes you need to take a step back. So taking some breaks in between classes, I think is very valuable, and almost just as valuable as taking classes. Because if you're taking too many courses, I think often people can get overtrained as a medium. And then it kind of convolutes their natural just way of working with people on the other side. And I think that's unfortunate, because it can really block a lot of what they have to offer without them realizing it. And, you know, it can just kind of impair their natural flow of doing things. Because that's the other thing, is that I want to make clear, is that I think one of the best things about mediumship is that it should be unique. That every person is unique in the way they connect and bring through information. And that's the way it should be. Because if you think about it, there's so many people in the spirit world, and not all of them are going to be compatible with one person. They're going to be compatible with different types of people. So you need that variety. You want that variety to kind of just have more options, if that makes sense. So the other thing too to just bring up is, again, which I've said a few times, is that mediumship is not for everyone. And again, that's okay. So when you decide, okay, I think this is something I want to pursue, there's a few things to keep in mind here. First of all, that, you know, if death and maybe negative things, or people having a difficult life, things that are uncomfortable, if that stuff bothers you to the point where like you can't even handle thinking about it or really diving into it, you may not want to be medium. Because unfortunately, and this is the other thing, I never think that mediumship should dwell completely on the way someone died or the terrible things that happened. You know, that's just a piece of it. All that is really, if you're a good medium, you know, it's just evidence. But then you're really moving on from there, right? It's not dwelling on that. And I also want you to realize that that stuff can't harm you. The only thing that it can do is really just how much you allow it to stay with you, how much you allow it to have power over you. But it doesn't have to. But again, not everybody is able to do this, and that's okay. It just means that you may want to reconsider this line of work, because it's something you're going to have to deal with on a daily basis, okay? The other thing is understanding that this is a life of service. You're going to be giving a lot and a lot and a lot. And it takes a lot of work to have those boundaries and be able to have balance, but realizing that it's a life of service. The other thing is realizing that mediumship is always a roller coaster. And some people like that, but it's also, what I mean is that any medium will know this, that we have times where we have great readings and it's awesome. And then we'll have a reading that just sucks, right? And it's just like, what was that about? And there's a lot of things behind that, but we got to be able to kind of not let that bruise our ego, because that's a big one too. Mediumship can get very easily tied into ego, and you got to be able to separate that if you do this as your job. You can't let it be a direct like thing with who you are as a person, because that's another thing to keep in mind. If you do pursue mediumship, you don't want it to be your complete identity. That's all you are. You always want to keep in mind all the other things that you are besides a medium, because you don't want it to all be wrapped up in one thing like that, especially because of the nature of this work. It's not always going to feel great. Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's not going to feel great. So if you can't deal with the up and down, That's another thing to consider. The other thing is also the responsibility and the commitment it requires. It requires a lot of work, a lot of dedication, and a lot of commitment. But it's so worth it. It is so worth it if that's what you want and you want to really help people. But it's also the responsibility. The responsibility is a big one because as a medium, I mean, for me, I take a lot of pride in really making sure that my morals and everything that I'm doing is coming from the highest possible place, right? And realizing that we're dealing with people in some of their worst places, dealing with people that are in their most vulnerable times in their life, right? And we have to be very, very aware of what we're saying to them and how we're handling that, right? So being really mindful of that and taking that very seriously is a big deal, because that's the other thing that unfortunately happens too often is in mediumship, people will kind of take this stuff, they won't take it as seriously, and they say stuff that can be really harmful to the sitter. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And let me just check my notes here to make sure. Yeah, and I think another thing too is really understanding, you really want to make sure that you have a clear vision as to your why. Why do I want to pursue mediumship as a career, right? That's a big one. Because if it's just, oh, I just want to help people, that's not really enough. Like, that's great. But it has to be deeper than that. And you have to be really, really clear with yourself, internally and externally, of just like, that's what your goal really is here in doing this work, right? So again, all of those things are all important factors to kind of think about. So, but if one of you are listening, right, and you think, no, I mean, that I feel good about that, that feels right, then great. Then I would recommend pursuing it, maybe looking into it. And again, you don't have to go crazy right away. I really think going slow is the best thing you can do. Because the other thing with development is that it takes time. And it's really respecting the fact that it takes time. Because rushing is never going to help you with mediumship especially, right? And it's also keeping in mind, it's so different than doing just psychic work. You're dealing with even more vulnerable situations here. So you want to take your time to make sure that you're really delivering the best possible service you can. Oh, and another thing that I almost forgot that is so important that I think most people overlook as well is you got to heal yourself. Number one, first thing ever, right? That is the most important thing ever as a medium. Because here's the thing, a lot of people will get this backwards, where they maybe have, let's say, a lot of trauma or a lot of issues or a lot of things that are built up over time, and they're like, okay, I just want to develop mediumship and dive in, and that's all I want to focus on. Problem with that is that you are the channel, right? So you're going to bring that filter, all of your problems and things, trauma, all of that is going to filter the messages that you're bringing through, and can also really mess with the stuff that you're able to give to your sitters, your clients. So again, don't get me wrong, I think we're always healing our whole lives. That's a lifelong process. But the major big guys that are like, on your shoulder, on your back, whatever, right? Those are the ones that you want to address first and foremost if you haven't. Because here's an example. Let's say I'm bringing through someone's dad, and I have major trauma associated with my dad. That could make me very judgmental, cloudy in what I'm bringing through. It can really alter the stuff that I'm bringing through, and I may also not want to get closer or deeper into a connection with this person's dad because I have resistance there, right? So that's really important to keep in mind. Doing the healing work, and I think the other thing is realize that the healing work takes place also as you're developing, but it's something to just really, really, really keep in mind because it's so important. So important. So that's a really big one too. And then also, and the other thing too is being really okay with who you are. at your core. Because this is the thing, mediumship is a very vulnerable thing. Some people don't maybe think that, but I think it's one of the most vulnerable things to experience, because you're merging with another soul. And the way that they communicate with you is that they're using your personal life experience to show you things that you're going to understand, that you'll be able to communicate to the sitter. So if you're not comfortable with all aspects of your life, and I'm not saying comfortable, right? But because maybe certain things we're not always going to ever be comfortable with, but at least accepting of and open with, right? If there are certain things that we're not comfortable with or accepting of in ourselves, that's also going to create a block. That's going to create resistance when it comes to that, making that connection. So that's another thing to also keep in mind. So that's a lot. So I just gave you guys a lot of information, right? And I know quite a few of you are going to watch this on the replay. But if any of this brings up questions, or just like what some of you guys were sharing before, like certain experiences that you could share that you've had that were kind of like what I was talking about, I'd love to hear that in the comments. And then if some of you have had a lot of these experiences and you really feel like you want to explore this further, I'm really, really excited, because I'm going to be having my first ever beginner's mediumship course starting in mid-November, November 10th, actually, I believe, to be exact. I'm really excited. So if any of you guys want more details on that, just let me know in the comments, and I will message you directly to give you more of the info. I don't have the sales page up right now, but it should be up within the next week. But I'm really excited because I'm very passionate about helping people connect and get through all of these different things, because mediumship is complicated. I think that's the other thing. And you really need that support. Just having that extra support of somebody that's been through it and understands it is so invaluable. So I can't wait to connect with some people and really dive in with them. And I love you guys. Thanks for being here. And let me know if, like I said, in the comments, if any other questions come up, let me know. And I can always answer them in another live, like next week. You're welcome, Sherry. Yeah, and if you guys watch this on the replay, you want information, you got it, Sherry. I'm messaging you in a little bit, okay? You're welcome, Karina. You guys are so welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, you guys, I'll see you all soon. Have a beautiful rest of your day, okay? Bye.